Hello, everybody. I would like to open this episode of the podcast with a little bit of an acknowledgement. The contents of this episode are a little bit outdated, about by 2 weeks, which I acknowledge within the episode. As such, there is an important major event that went unnoticed and unmentioned within this episode, as it had only happened until recently, as of the time of this recording of the acknowledgement. With that being said, it would feel incomplete without mentioning that, unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond his control, Homicide, the living legend, the notorious 187, was forced to retire due to a cyst in his brain affecting his vision and his speech. And as such, his retirement match was at Outlaw Wrestling on March 20th, where he tag teamed with Bull James against Mike Santana and Alpha Jr. I consider myself incredibly privileged to have been within the audience and even to have been a small part of the show. Thank you, Santana, for wearing my flag to the ring. And I mention all of this with the full acknowledgement that I am a young blood. By the time Homicide started his career, I was probably still in diapers. And by the time I finally had a mindset that there was wrestling beyond the WWE, Homicide was in the last years of his career. What all this is meant to say is I know less about Homicide than most. But what I do know is he is a legend among legends. He has done more for this industry than a lot of other people can say, be it through the matches he's had, the bumps he's taken, the work he's done to boost up indie wrestling through his work with TNA, Ring of Honor, or the Independents, or the time he's spent uplifting Latin American wrestlers, whatever ethnicity they are, thanks to the Latin American exchange. For everything you've done for this business, thank you, Homicide. You deserve to rest easy for the rest of your days. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your matches. Thank you for your everything. And now on with the episode. Hello and welcome to Crit's Ringside Chat, your eyes, ears, and voice for pro wrestling in NYC, and your one-stop shop for an honest critique from an honest fan. And in lieu of the week that we've had last week, wherein there was no less than 3 big shows in New York City, that being Monday Night Raw at Madison Square Garden, NXT Roadblock at the theater in Madison Square Garden, and House of Glory's The City of Dreams in the NYC Arena. There is a lot, and I mean a lot, that could be talked about. I could talk about that really good cage match at Monday Night Raw. I could talk about our first women's double champion in NXT with Stephanie Vaquer. Or I could talk about the fact that Main Event are staying together and are your 3-time House of Glory Tag Team Champions. But instead, having viewed all of these shows in person, I think a good topic of discussion that we can have is audience perception. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? I'm going to discuss the differences between a main roster audience, that being a Monday Night Raw or a Friday Night SmackDown audience for WWE, an NXT audience, and your local indie audience, that being from the perspective of House of Glory. Now, for a few of you listening, the answer to these might be obvious. Main roster crowds are only here for certain people in certain moments. They're not here for wrestling. And you know what? You're right. But just saying that means nothing. It means more if we can actually get into what that actually means. So, I'm going to give you my perspective on my point of view from the crowd of being on Monday Night Raw, NXT Roadblock, and House of Glory all in 1 week. So I'm just going to say this outright. NXT and House of Glory clears Monday Night Raw when it comes to participation, passion, engagement with the show. What do I mean by that? Well, with the House of Glory crowd that I was in, outside of a few Mercedes stands that I just so happened to end up being near. And yes, unfortunately, I had thought that Mercedes stands were just a figment of the internet, but no, they are very, very real people, and they are just as weird in real life as they are on the internet. But outside of those people who apparently spent the whole time not even giving a shit about the entire show except for Mercedes Moné, and straight up leaving after Mercedes Moné's match was finished, despite there being a whole main event to be had, An HOG crowd is passionate. They are here for their locals. They are here for the people coming in. They are here for whoever just shows up, period. Like, ignoring the Mercedes stands, I was shocked, and legitimately I was shocked at how balanced it was between Mercedes and Indy when it came to who wanted to win. At the same time, I was surprised at the amount of people who are on just as much on Mantequilla's side as they were on Danhausen's side. Matter of fact, if my memory serves me correctly, more people were on Mantequilla's side, especially after he was able to beat Danhausen. Meanwhile, for your NXT crowd, they were savvier than I give them credit for in New York. Now, I already knew that the crowd within Florida, within Orlando, within the WWE Performance Center, they are as passionate can get, especially since they're pretty much there on a weekly basis. So they know everybody who's there, and they're excited for everybody who's there. On the flip side, when NXT travels to these other states, these other wherevers, I get a little bit concerned on whether or not they can recognize certain people. Like, yeah, I know they're going to recognize Trick Williams, Roxanne Perez, Obafemi, etc., Fraxium, etc. But when it comes to the smaller guys, like let's say Javon Evans, who I wouldn't say is a no-name, but he's still like a fresher face on the roster compared to the likes of like Sean Spears or Tony D'Angelo. But I think the roster that they put together for that show definitely made up for that fact, because there were a lot of people that a lot of people recognized. I mean, you had Fraxium, the Hardys, Obafemi, Julia, Stephanie Vaquer, and so on and so on and so on. Not to mention, the environment of the arena was very, very solid, and I think that helped with the presentation for the audience a lot. The theater at MSG is incredibly cozy. It was my first time sitting in that arena, and let me tell you, it was a delight. I may honestly compare it better than Madison Square Garden. I may prefer it better than Madison Square Garden. Like, Madison Square Garden, obviously, very beautiful arena, very famous arena, luxurious. I have nothing horrible to say about Madison Square Garden, aside from maybe how they get people out the door and maybe something about the security, but that's a whole other discussion. But the theater at MSG was such a vibe. The energy, you could feel it in your bones. The chants were electric. The hype was electric. The hatred for Moose was electric. To be as polite as possible, Moose had it coming. Anyway, the point of all of this being is that NXT crowds and your local indie crowds are surprisingly very similar in that they know what they want. And what they want is the wrestling. They're okay with the little silly gimmicks every now and then because, hey, NXT can be silly. Let's fully acknowledge it. I mean, hey, Tony D'Angelo's in an Italian mafia. We had a whole school with Chase University. NXT can get pretty fucking goofy. And I love that for it. I love goofy NXT, don't get me wrong. We just have to make sure that we acknowledge it. We can't act like it's 100% serious 100% of the time. But at the same time, that's the same truth for a lot of your local indies. A lot of your local indie talent can be a little bit goofy. They have a little bit of goofy gimmicks. I mean, look at Danhausen. Look at Mantequilla. Look at Joe Hendry. Look at a few other people that escape me right now. The point of it all being, they know what they're here for, and that is they are here for the wrestlers. My point being, wrestlers. Plural. All of them. Maybe they're not cool with one or two people on the roster, but trust, when an NXT fan or your local indie fan buys a ticket, rest assured they are not just here for one or two or three people. They are here for everybody that is on the show. WWE crowds, main roster crowds, not so much. There's two main problems with main roster crowds. And I'm not talking about the casuals, the moms and dads taking their kids to see their favorite wrestlers type fans. No, not those. Those I have no problem with, because those are just families going out for a night of fun. I totally get that, and I got no problem with people like that. Outside of that group, there's two main problems with a main roster crowd. Number one, they are only here for X amount of people on a show, and they will say fuck everybody else. For a Monday Night Raw, for example, they are here for Seth Rollins, Jey Uso, Rhea Ripley, CM Punk, maybe maybe Gunther, and Becky Lynch if she ever decides to come back, along with few sporadic appearances by John Cena or Cody Rhodes. For a SmackDown crowd, they are here for Randy Orton, Cody Rhodes, LA Knight, Tiffany Stratton, Jacob Fatu, maybe Charlotte Flair, and that's it. Everybody else on the roster, they could not give a fuck about. They will stay silent for other people if you are not the likes of Cody Rhodes, Rey Mysterio, Jey Uso, etc., etc., etc. If you are on the mid-card and you are not a champion like LA Knight or Braun Breaker, you get silence. If you're a woman and you are not one of the 4 horsewomen, Rhea Ripley or Tiffany Stratton, you get silence. You get boring chants. You get nobody cares chants. To the point that I was legitimately shocked that New York cheered for Io Sky. You could have asked me before that Monday Night Raw, do you think people are going to pop for Io Sky? And I would have told you legitimately, no, I do not think so. But I was wrong. Io Sky was one of 2 people that got a pop, maybe even 3 women that got a pop, because there are people around me that really hated Bianca Belair for some strange reason. But they love Rhea Ripley. They love the buff goth Dami Mommy. Not because she's a good wrestler, not because she's a great promo, not because she's one of the greatest young talents of our time, to the point that she's barely in her prime despite being 28. They love her because they think she's hot. And therein lies one of the problems with main roster crowds. They are not here for wrestlers. They are here for moments, and they are here for people. They are here to participate. They don't want to see Jey Uso wrestle. They want to see Jey Uso go down through the audience and yeet along with him. They don't want to see Rhea Ripley wrestle. They want to see Rhea Ripley do something kind of sexual so that they can get their rocks off. They don't want to see Seth Rollins wrestle. They want to see Seth Rollins do the dance so that they can sing along to his song. Which, by the way, leads me into the second problem with main roster crowds. They think that just because you buy a ticket, you're part of the show. You own the show. You are the show. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I cannot tell you how many main roster crowds I've been in where people start doing the wave or chanting CM Punk when CM Punk wasn't even a part of WWE at the time, or started throwing beach balls around because they want to be a part of the show. They want to hijack the show even. Just chanting random things to get the audience going because they're bored with the match they're currently having. Chanting what at random intervals because they don't like the person that's talking. Chanting "we want tables" for a match that isn't even no disqualifications. Which, by the way, I might add, is one of the most entitled chants to ever come out of wrestling. And I fully blame the Dudley Boys for giving the people the reason to want fucking tables. I don't really blame them, I'm just mad. The point of it all being, get a member of the main roster crowd bored enough, especially get them drunk enough, and they start acting like they should be the ones to dictate the show, and start loudly chanting, screaming, saying weird ass shit, because they want to be involved. They want to act like it's their show, and the wrestlers don't matter. Because to main roster fans, the wrestlers really don't matter. At least not the ones that show up to the arenas. Online, it's a different story, and that's a completely different discussion that we can have at a later date. To wrap up this little disjointed discussion, all I can say at the end of the day is this. NXT crowds and your local indie crowds, they are here for the wrestlers. They are here for the wrestling. They are here for the matches. They're not just here to chant. They're not just here to wave their arms. They're not just here to shout insults or say weird shit to Lyra Valkyria like clap them cheeks in the middle of a fucking interview. They are here for the wrestling, which is what this business is all about. Main roster crowds, outside of the parents taking their kids out to do whatever, these grown-ass men getting drunk off their asses and trying to hijack the show because they feel entitled to it because they're bored. Treating every other woman that's not named Rhea Ripley, Tiffany Stratton, or any of the 4 horsewomen, even some of the 4 horsewomen too, with disrespect. It's a mess. they are a mess. But until next time, whether it's on your screen in NYC or Travel Necessity, we will be seated. My name is Crit. Thank you for joining me at Ringside.